Hello, Year 11. Today we're going to be going through an Inspector Calls practice question. You can find the question I'm using on Teams. Your teacher should have uploaded it to the folder, and I'll try and put a link, if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description to somewhere you can download it from as well. Okay, so the first thing to say about this is that because of the changes that have been made to the exam this year, you actually have a little bit more time than perhaps you may have thought. So you are previously would have had 45 minutes, but now you have 60 minutes to answer this question. It goes on the Macbeth paper and you'll be practicing it in your mock. With any question, the worst thing you can do is not read the question properly and end up answering on the wrong thing. That is particularly true of an Inspector Calls, as we'll go through in a moment. So let's read the question firstly. You should use the extract below in your knowledge of the whole place to answer this question. Write about Mr. Birling and how he is presented at different points in the play. Now, I've marked this paper for many, many years, and whenever they ask this question, I would say probably about 1 in 40 people write about Mrs. Birling rather than Mr. Birling, and it's the same when it's the other way around. So particularly on an Inspector Calls, you've got to check very carefully. They will ask you about a character or a theme, but you've got to check really carefully. Is it a Mr. Birling, or is it a he, or is it a Mrs. Birling and a she? So other parts of this that we might want to pick out are that we need to refer to the whole play. Okay, and reminder, about 60% or more of what you say should be about the whole play, and about 40% should be about the extract. What that really looks like is when you come to write your answer, you're going to end up with 3 or 4 paragraphs, depending on how long your paragraphs are. One of those will be about the extract, and we'll talk about how to structure that in a minute, but you're writing about the whole play. Okay, in your response, you should refer to the extract and play as a whole. We know this. Show your understanding of characters and events in the play, and luckily, our understanding of events in the play is particularly good because of the quality of that YouTube video that I made in my home studio last time for you. So, yeah, you can thank me. I like double-deckers, twirls, whispers, most chocolate bars actually, not toffee crisps, but anything else I'll accept as thanks. Okay, and last thing, 5 of this question's marks are allocated for accuracy in spelling, punctuation, and the use of vocabulary and sentence structures. People get caught up on this one. It's not worth stressing about. Okay, if you are watching this, you're probably in a top set and your spag is probably better than you think it is, and you're going to be getting a 3 or a 4 or a 5. I have never, in marking over 1,000 of these papers, given a 1 for spag, ever. And the same goes for a 0. Nearly everybody drops into that 2, 3, 4, 5 bracket. It's very unusual to get 5, but it's very unusual to get lower than 2. And certainly, the only reason you would get lower than a 2 is if you just write a 1 sentence or something like that. So provided we avoid that, you will be fine. So we're going to look at the extract in a moment, but already, once you've read this, you should be thinking, what do I know about Mr. Birling? What's he like? So let's just talk through some of those things, and we'll make some notes about it as we go. So the first thing we want to know about Mr. Birling is he is a source of, whoops, caps lock is on, dramatic irony. Yeah, so we know when he gives his speech at the start of the play, that he references the sinking of the Titanic, and he also references the First World War being impossible. And we know that Priestley does this deliberately in order to make him seem like a fool, so that we think the rest of his opinions are foolish. And as if we weren't sure about that, he does it one more time by making sure the inspector interrupts him when he walks in for the first time. And Birling is giving a big speech. Let's add this in actually. Dramatic irony. Demonstrates he's a fool. Sorry if you're going to click here with my keys. Demonstrate he's a fool. Inspector interrupts his speech on why community is nonsense. Okay, and you'll notice that I've used 2 quotes. But they're not particularly difficult quotes to remember. He does say community and all that nonsense, but I can remember, if I'm in the exam and I can remember that he describes community as nonsense, then I'm doing okay. Right. So we've started thinking about a dramatic technique. Now let's think about, within Inspector Calls, you're nearly always going to talk about, if it's a character, their interrogation. So we also might want to talk about his role in the death of Eva Smith. So we know he is a factory owner. We know he shows little to no remorse, although we might think at the end of the play he says, "I'd give thousands." So he does show that he's changed to a certain extent, or it suggests he's changed to a certain extent, although he still views things as monetary transactions. And we also know that when he says he fired Eva Smith, he says she had to go, of course, which implies that, again, he thinks he's absolutely justified in doing that, and Gerald backs him up. Another way of thinking about character questions is think about what themes does each character help us understand. And abuse of power is a classic one that you can apply to most of them. But with Mr. Birling, I think the difference between public versus private life is a really interesting theme. So we could talk, if we wanted to explore that, about his knighthood, which he boasts, thank you, autocorrect, to Gerald about. We could also talk about, we've got to cover this up immediately, which is what he says to Eric after the inspector's gone about the... Actually, no, it's whilst the inspector's still there. It's what he says to Eric when he finds out that Eric's stolen money through fraudulent use of the company's account. And then finally, he says during Mrs. Birling's interrogation, after it's revealed that she refused charity to this poor, desperate, pregnant woman who turned up on her doorstep, he says that it won't look good when it comes out at the inquest. Now, as I've typed that quote, I can't remember if he actually says it won't do us any favours when it comes out of the inquest, or it won't look good, but it doesn't matter because the exam board are not testing you for your absolute 100% knowledge of quotes. What they're testing you for is your knowledge of the play, which is why we went over the events in that first video. So if you think you're close to the quote, then you're close enough. Now I'm going to pause the video for a second, or I'm going to shut up and go make myself a cup of tea or something, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes. See if you can add 2 more bullet points that you could say things about. I don't know why I'm typing that out, but anyway, there you go. That's where they go. So see if on your copy you could write 2 more things that you could discuss for Mr. Birling. It could be a relationship, how he is with his son Eric and what that reveals to us, and then you could compare that to how he is with Gerald at the start of the play. It could be how he responds in a key moment, how he sort of works out with Gerald that the inspector is a fraud. So just add in on your page 2 more things that you could discuss, because we want more things than we necessarily are going to need. Okay, I'm getting bored of not saying anything. So if you've done that, great, well done. Sticky gold star. If you haven't, pause the video and make sure that you get those 2 extra points down, because we're going to move on and we're going to think about the extract. So let's just quickly scan the extract and try and work out where it comes from, because that's an important part. So Birling jovially, but the whole thing's different now. Come, can't you see that, can't you? So instantly imitating the inspector in his final speech. We know this has come from the end of the play, and it's actually at the very, very end of the play. It's the last page or so of the book. If we scroll down, that is the final line of the play. So we know when we write our essay, these paragraphs here are going to be probably paragraphs 1, 2, 3. or possibly just 1 and 2 if we were going to write big, meaty, chunky paragraphs. Although with an hour, you should probably be aiming for 4 now. In fact, you definitely should. I'm going to tell you, write 4 paragraphs. This is going to be our final one. Yeah, because what we're going to do is wherever your extract comes from, you slot it in. So if you get an extract from the middle of the play, you put it as your middle paragraph. If you get an extract from the start of the play, you put it as one of your opening paragraphs. But this extract is from the end of the play. Now, we've got an hour. We already know 3 of our 4 paragraphs, and they're nothing to do with the extract. So we don't need to spend, 10 minutes annotating this to the nth degree. What we do need to do is pick out maybe 4 or 5 things and think about how Birling is presented. Now, obviously, hopefully what happens is you look at the extract, you go, oh yeah, it's from there, and the character is like this in that. So in this, we know Mr. Birling is triumphant. It's at the end of the play. He's just found out that he's not on the hook for any sort of public scandal. He thinks his knighthood is back on, and he's in a triumphant, joyful mood. And we also know that that's about to be undercut. And I think I spoke at the end of the last video about questioning whether that is actually an example of Priestley telling us that if you don't learn from your mistakes, you are doomed to repeat them. So, how might we describe Birling in this end section then? We might say that he is dumbfounded. We might say that he is ignorant as he's refused to learn his lesson. We might say that he's celebratory. But whatever we do, we need to have enough evidence for it. Now, in Inspector Calls, Priestley very kindly is very good at giving us interesting adverbs to talk about in terms of how the characters say things. So just scanning down without even reading it, I can pick out that Birling is speaking jovially, which is sort of an old-fashioned way of saying cheerfully and teasing a little bit. And later on, he is amused. And just a little bit earlier, it's heartily. So we can say, even through the way that he speaks, that he's in a positive mood, but also they're quite casual words. He's not taking things very seriously at this point at all. I can also see, just really quickly, that in the stage directions, he's described as pointing at Sheila and Eric, not once, but where was it? Somewhere else. There we go, pointing to Eric and Sheila. So I can also see that Priestley is highlighting him as being on the opposite end of the spectrum to Sheila and Eric at both those points. So that's 2 things I can say, and I've not even looked at what he says. Now, again, I'm going to pause it and I'm going to give you a minute to read it, and then we'll go through and we'll pick out everything we could say. Actually, no, we won't do that because it's a waste of your time. We'll pick out 7 things that we could talk about. Okay, so I'll give you another minute. Pause the video if you need to, and go through it. Okay, I'm assuming you've paused that. So we've already said, I said we'd do 7 things. Let's do 7 things. So point number 1, we can talk about the adverbs that Priestley uses to help us understand what Birling is like. So he says things jovially, heartily, and we get the adjective amused, which show that he's taking things very, very casually, that he doesn't think it's a big deal, that he's in a cheerful mood. We can contrast that with the adjective dumbfounded at the end here. So what Priestley's doing is he's dramatically undercutting the mood in the scene. So we also talked about the stage direction pointing to Eric and Sheila. I'm not going to talk about that again. So that's 2. Other things that are always worth looking at are punctuation, because often this will tell us the type of sentences that a character is using, which tells us something interesting to talk about, and also the language that they're using. So let's do language first. So if we look at Birling's big chunk, which opens the extract, he actually quotes directly the inspector, "You all helped to kill her," but he's imitating him and he's using it in a mocking tone. So, I mean, this doesn't even suggest, this helps the audience, I suppose, to understand that he is taking the whole thing as a joke and he doesn't seem to care at all. Later on, we see Birling describing Sheila as hysterical, and Eric as well. And again, this is an important quote because it reveals to us that he is at the opposite end of the spectrum to these characters, and that he thinks that the idea of taking their actions seriously is laughable. It's just not something that you should even be considering. So what does that give us now? 4. Okay, 3 more. One more language point. I think probably the most revealing thing that Birling says in this section is to Sheila. And he says, look, you better ask Gel for that ring you gave back to him, hadn't you? And I think this is a significant moment because Sheila is his daughter, and we know that Gerald has cheated on her. We could also do some nice overview skills and reference this back to at the start of the play when Birling seems to see this marriage more as a business transaction than as something that has his daughter's best interests at heart, perhaps. But the idea that you can forget that his wrongdoing is one thing, but the idea that he feels his daughter should forgive Gerald or forget, or just that it's not even significant, is something totally different. So let's look at punctuation, and there's 2 things that are worth talking about. Number 1 is the use of hyphens in this final section, and particularly after a girl has just died. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hyphens in this section. And obviously this reveals that he is unable to form coherent sentences, that he is genuinely shocked and appalled by what's happened, and it's come as a complete surprise to him, which is in contrast to his daughter and his son, who sort of understand what's going on at this time. And I think the other piece of punctuation which is revealing are his question marks earlier on in the scene. So he asks Sheila and Eric in particular a lot of questions because he literally cannot understand their point of view. He's so far away removed from it, and Priestley reveals that through the continued use of questions, or, if you want to be posh, interrogatives throughout this section. Finally, it's always worth looking at what other characters say and how they behave. And I think Sheila has a really good line here, which is, you began to learn something and now you've stopped. And it's worth referencing here that An Inspector Calls was written by Priestley as a morality play. It's designed to teach us a lesson. And here, what Sheila's doing is she's reminding the audience of everything that's happened and of the key message in the play, which is that we learn from our actions and that we treat other people with respect and as equals. So definitely worth looking at what other characters are saying around them, and there's lots of examples of that you could talk about here. Now, what you guys now need to do is decide which of these you want to talk about. If you wrote a paragraph with 7 quotes in it, you'd be taking an awfully long time and you probably wouldn't be analysing them in any detail, particularly as this is going to be your last paragraph and you might be rushing by the end of your hour when you get to it. So what I would suggest is picking 4 of those, possibly 5, that you think are really important or that you could say something interesting about. Probably even more interesting than something I've said, I know, but it is possible. So pause it now and spend a little bit of time on that. Okay, so hopefully you've got those points down into something which looks like one of these that we practiced right at the very start. So that is the exact same style of thing that you will be getting in the real exam. I'm just going to finish by saying 2 things. Number 1, this is a really good revision activity. If you ask your teacher, they will be able to give you 4, 5, maybe 6 practice questions for An Inspector Calls. And this is an activity which I've done in 19 minutes and 23 seconds, and which you can do in a similar amount of time. So in 20 minutes, almost in the half-time break in a football match, you can plan in detail an essay response by going through the extract and thinking about what to include in your other paragraphs. And that is a really useful way of recapping your understanding of the text, refreshing your memory on some of the quotes you need to know, and brushing up on your planning essay writing skills as well. If you wanted to extend that, another really useful thing to do is to write your plan up in this same detailed way that we've just practiced, and then write either 1 or 2 paragraphs. You don't have to do the whole essay every time. Writing 1 or 2 paragraphs is a good approach if you want to. If you've got a half an hour block, say, and you want to do some English revision, you think, well, I can't answer a full question, it's an hour. You can plan it, and then you can write a paragraph or 2, and that's a really useful skill as well. Obviously, the best thing that you can do is at some point lock yourself away for an hour and have a really good go at writing one of these up in full. Or give yourself 45 minutes and write up something that you've planned earlier in full. But those are really useful revision techniques. You know, we all get frustrated, all of the English teachers get frustrated with people coming to us and saying, oh, I don't know how to revise for English. Or my personal thing that kills me inside every time I see it is people just writing quote after quote after quote on cards, because it doesn't necessarily help you learn. The way you revise in English is by writing. You practice a question, you plan a response, you write a paragraph, you write an essay. That is English revision. Highlighting things might feel nice, and creating quote cards might make you feel like you've got something you've got something that you can use in the future. And it's definitely not a total waste of time, but using those quotes in a piece of writing is going to be much more useful, and it's going to be much better for you long term. Planning is going to be much more effective way of recapping the events of the play than anything else you can do. So I hope that's been useful. Like and subscribe.